Welcome to the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and I am so honored and thankful to have Dr. Soham Patel join us today. How are you, sir?
Doing well, Laurie. Thank you for inviting me, and hello to all your viewers.
Wonderful. And I will tell you, let me see. Dr. Patel is a gem of a find. He's an endocrinologist who encourages a plant-based diet and has some amazing stories to share with those. So when I found Dr. Patel, I was on the phone with him not too shortly thereafter. It's like, I'm very excited to meet you. It's so funny how you stalk people that are specialists, like, okay, I like you. So, but that is, so exciting to see some specialists that we think are very important to be in, the fight against diabetes and things. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you become and decide to go into medicine and especially endocrinology?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the western part of India from the state of Gujarat, and the city is called Ahmedabad. It's the same city where Mahatma Gandhi started his independence movement from. So it's a very historical city. It's one of the growing metros. But I went schooling as well as med school there. And after that, came here to US and did my residency in University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And then I pursued my endocrine fellowship at UAB in Birmingham. So going back to why I entered medicine, so I did quite well academically. I was in the top 100 students in the state. There are about 50,000 students who appear for 12th grade boards, which is a standardized exam, and I was 80th. Wow. In the merit ranking. So I had options of going into whichever field I chose to. The thing that brought me to medicine was, and this is the quote I used in my interview, is medicine is the only specialty where you can learn about the mysteries of the best creation in this world, which is the human body. And it's still an endless field. We're still learning more and more as we go. So that's something that brought me to medicine, and it still keeps us pushing further. In med school, I quickly realized I was wired more so to be a physician than a surgeon. I kind of struggled through my surgery rotations, but I did exceptionally well in medicine-related rotations, and that's how I am. I like to analyze things, sit down, talk to the patient, build up a rapport, and see the patient over years. So medicine gives me that kind of freedom to do that. And while in the residency, I went through different rotations, keeping in mind what would interest me. And every rotation that I would have, 4-week blocks. The first couple of weeks would be exciting, but then by the end of third week, it would start getting redundant. Endocrinology was my only rotation that I felt all the 4 weeks were equally exciting. It was a very well-designed rotation at University of Tennessee. We had 9 endocrinologists in the division, headed by Dr. Bill Law Jr., who has been one of the board and charter members of American College of Endocrinology and American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. So he was a great mentor in addition to all the other endocrinologists under him that I had the opportunity to train with. So I did one more rotation there to kind of make sure, is it again really the same excitement I'm feeling? So I did a rotation in second year as well as third year of medicine residency and applied for fellowship and then matched at University of Alabama in Birmingham. Again, an exceptional program. My program director, Dr. Fernando Valle, he focuses a lot on diabetes now, but he is a very laid-back person, and would learn a lot just from talking to him. Casual chats, you would end up learning a couple things new every time you talk to him. So great mentors. I think I've been blessed with very good mentors throughout my training, and During the fellowship, we obviously had a lot of protected time to do research, and I'm backtracking a little bit because the seed of plant-based nutrition was planted into me by my maternal grandfather. He was a civil engineer by training. He worked in the government back in India, supervising building dams. But he was a very avid reader and would spend hours in the library, and that's where he started reading Dr. Barnard and Dr. Joel Fuhrman and Dr. Herbert Shelton, who pioneered fasting in US back in the 1940s, and treating people by natural ways of nutrition and fasting. He even ran a magazine called American Hygiene Society. So my grandfather was quite influenced by his work, and he would share all that with me. And I kind of understood that. I've grown up as a lacto-vegetarian, but had a lot of dairy in my diet. So he would show me the things about dairy was not the best thing to have, but I somehow didn't get the memo there early on. And he was telling me all those things even before I entered med school. But something clicked when I was in fellowship. I'm like, okay, Grandpa has been telling me about all this. Let me start looking into it myself and see what the data is. And that's when I started pulling up papers, and I was quite surprised, astounded that why didn't I look at this earlier? And if I didn't make changes going forward, I was just kidding myself, putting blinders in spite of all that data. There were studies were published back in 1999 by Dr. Dean Ornish, the lifestyle heart trial reversing heart disease with a whole food plant-based diet, exercise, stress reduction, social connectivity, and counseling. Dr. Esselstyn had something similar at the Cleveland Clinic. Going back till 1921, there were trials done by Dr. Anderson where within 16 days of going whole food plant-based, 70% of patients came off insulin in just 16 days, not even months. So that's where it propelled me to first make the change myself. I stopped having dairy overnight. One day in November 2014, I just decided at dinner that I'm not going to have dairy anymore. And I stopped, and I was not doing anything different. I was not eating less. I was not exercising. I just stopped having dairy, which was a pretty big chunk. I would have 2 glasses of milk a day and a pound of yogurt every day. That was literally my routine for 30 years. And I stopped doing that. Within 3 weeks, I lose 20 pounds, just like that, and coming off from the abdomen, where I wanted it to come off from. And so to prove it was from that, I started having a little bit of yogurt again for a week. And within a week, I gained 5 pounds back.
Wow.
And then I stop again, and it comes off again. And since then, my weight has stayed the same. About a year ago, I started doing 30 minutes of resistance training in the gym twice a week. And with that, I've lost another 4 pounds, but now I'm again at a plateau where I don't watch the portions or the amount of food I eat. I do watch what I eat, what type of foods I eat, but I don't watch the portion or the amount. And I don't eat after 7 p.m. I try to restrict my feeding window between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
Okay.
12 hours of intermittent fasting. And with that, it stays pretty steady.
So you found a personal journey of weight loss and evidenced by your grandpa. I love that so much. How long is your grandpa still living?
He passed away 2 years ago, but he had a very active 84 years of life.
84.
Yeah, except the last 2 weeks, he kind of fell, slipped on the floor and fell and hit his head. And had complications from the hemorrhagic stroke and died from that. But till then, he was walking. He spent like a whole month staying with us just before he passed away, and he would walk 5 miles every day.
Wow.
And he still had a tremendous appetite. He would eat a lot of food and not have any issues,
That's
um,
wonderful.
and
Aw.
sleep like a baby.
He's not your typical 84-year-old.
Yeah.
Oh. So I'm curious, why do you think it is that, you and I have spoken regarding the number of endocrinologists that we know that, recommend or follow a plant-based diet is so limited to what, 3 or 4? And why do you think that is? Why is this specialty so resistant? Because I know a ton of cardiologists and so many family practice doctors, but why endocrinology? Why do you think that? Or better yet, can you explain what endocrinology is, the specialty for those who don't know, and then why you feel like there may be a particular block or resistance?
So it's interesting you mentioned what is endocrinology. So endocrinology is the study of hormones and metabolism, and it's interesting, kind of ironic that the board certification that we get once we pass the boards is board certified in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism.
Mm.
It is not just endocrinology that is said. The board involves metabolism
Right.
as part of that certification. And yes, there is a lot of research into molecular endocrinology and bench research, but energy metabolism, calorie research, but there is not been enough focus in endocrinology training on understanding the data on plant-based nutrition.
Hmm.
It has been there for decades. It's nothing new. It's just not been explored as much. And it's still kind of a traditional view where calorie in, calorie out kind of mindset. Exercise more, eat less, which interestingly, there are endocrinologists who have debunked that paradigm with the research. Dr. Clay Semenovich, I believe I said his name correctly. He's the endocrine chief at WashU in WashU St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And his research actually debunks the theory that calorie in, calorie out, it's not true anymore.
Hmm.
The quantity of calorie is not as important as the quality of the calorie.
Interesting.
Like a calorie coming from fructose in a refined form ends up in the liver, cannot be used by the muscle or the adipose tissue.
Hmm.
So there is enough research. It's just the focus has been lagging in the trainings, and I think that's a huge reason why we don't see a lot of awareness of plant-based nutrition in endocrinology. And if we take a little step back, I think the whole focus of modern medicine is symptom pill kind of mindset, not really looking at the root cause and addressing the root problems to reverse things. But that paradigm shift is slowly happening in medical training, but it's still a lot of distance to go. I think those two things together are the reason why we are seeing lack of awareness. And then there's a lot of funding from entities for keto-based research in many of the programs, and that tends to cloud the quality of data out there. People are anyways confused with all these guidelines coming out, and then all that needs to be done is create doubt about good data by a not so properly designed study, and then that's it. People have doubt. They're not going to want to make any changes and just continue with status quo.
So do you think that it's more effective than as for someone like us, like you and myself and others who got this crazy hair going crazy thing going there? Is it more effective or more beneficial to actually go towards the patient then? So, start looking to the layperson and the general public and educating them in hopes that they'll take the torch and educate their other physicians.
Yeah, so the top-down approach is not going to work. It's just
Mm-hmm.
going to create more bureaucratic, layers, and the community approach to spread the awareness is what I am collaborating with a group of physicians, pharmacists, health coaches, and community leaders here in Tampa Bay. And we are working towards making a plant-based nutrition movement a nonprofit organization, which is already up and running in Chicago by one of the cardiologists at Rush, Dr. Steve Loam and Dr. Kim Williams are actively part of that. And we are trying to replicate that here in Tampa Bay. And the goal is to bring the awareness of that plant nutrition and the benefits to the lay people out there, and create a community support where we can, add more menu options in the restaurants, have cooking demos where people actually learn how to cook. Because I think in United States today's time, cooking is a lost skill. We still need to educate people to, start how to cook again, because convenience is easy, but convenience is not healthy.
Right. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Because many of the times when I mention, changing someone's diet, they're like, oh, well, how do I cook that? I'm like, it's like, you just cook it just the same as other foods. It's really interesting when you start thinking about it. The lost art of cooking is been detrimental to our health, because you're exactly right. All the fast food is not healthy. What is the name of your center?
Yeah, so I'm not boosting or claiming anything here, but I think I've coined the word preventive endocrinology. So the name of my clinic is Center for Preventive Endocrinology and Nutrition, as I wanted to incorporate prevention and nutrition both in my name of the practice. And that's how, it's just not the name, it's how I practice. With each patient that I see for diabetes or thyroid, Graves, high cholesterol, hypertension, I'm always focusing on nutrition as an equally important strategy of treatment along with medications, what they need. So nutrition is not just like a one-line blurb for me. It's a 20, 30-minute talk with the patient.
Right, absolutely. And can you give us some, maybe some examples of patients or statistics with, what you've seen personally with your patients? Like, how long does a type 2 diabetic typically take to stop insulin or reverse their disease? Or maybe type 1s, how much they're improving? And do you have any encouraging, insightful stories for us?
Sure. So it is individualistic, everybody is going to respond differently, but what I've seen as a recurring theme is when any patient adopts a whole food plant-based lifestyle, which means, vegetables, beans, fruits, whole grains, and a handful of nuts, and avoiding animal foods, including dairy and eggs, as much as possible. I think the shift typically happens when they're eating almost 80 to 90% plant-based diet. They really start seeing the benefits. What I usually tell my patients is, if you decide the pace. If you want incremental changes, then you go with incremental. If you need incremental benefits, then you go with incremental changes. And if you want drastic results, then you would have to go drastic changes. So that way the patient feels empowered on deciding what pace they need to make the change. And I'm there to help them make the change, and not that I'm telling them to do this, do that, and they're feeling patronized. So they feel an equal partner, which is what if they don't work on making changes, I can say everything in the world, but not see any results. So they are equal partner in their journey. And
that's a good point. Massive action equals massive results.
Yeah. So what I've seen is when they make a significant change, they start, within a week. If they go whole food plant-based, I've seen them going low on their blood sugar, that they have to start cutting back on their insulin. I had a patient that I used to follow, and she was a type 1 diabetic for 30 plus years, very well controlled on an insulin pump. A1C was always under 7%, more near 6.5. but her sugars would still go up and down quite a bit, a lot of variability, and not sleeping well, chronically gaining weight over years, just not having that energy to do things anymore, in spite of her lab numbers being all good or in very good range. And so I kept bringing up the idea of whole plant food nutrition with her, and something clicked with her in her visit in December 2017. And the next time I see her in March, she had gone whole food plant-based the very next day after the last visit. And within 3 months, she had lost 20 pounds, just coming off. She was not doing anything different. She was already active, so her activity hadn't changed. She was eating almost 200 to 250 grams of complex carbohydrates a day from fruits, vegetables, beans, and whole grains, versus 50 grams per day before. Wow. And her sugars were more flat on her pump downloads. She was sleeping better. Her LDL went from 103 on a statin to 68 on the same dose of same statin. Her blood pressure got better. I had to take her off her lisinopril. She was eating, as I said, she was eating a lot more complex carbohydrates. Her insulin requirements on the pump were around 80 units per day. Those went down to 32 units plus or minus 3 units per day.
Wow.
Her insulin carb ratio was 1 to 7, which I had to change it to 1 to 20 because she was getting so hypoglycemic after bolusing.
Wow. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by carb insulin ratio? Because I think that's really means a lot.
Sure. So insulin carb ratio is a metric that we use to see how sensitive to insulin is a particular patient is. So for example, if I say insulin carb ratio of 5, that means for every 5 grams of carbohydrates, that patient needs roughly 1 unit of insulin. The lower the number on the ratio means the more insulin resistant the person is. And higher the number means the more insulin sensitive the person is. In other words, if the number goes higher, means you need less and less insulin with bolusing.
Right.
So going from 7 to 20 was a big jump. And same way with the insulin sensitivity, which is again a metric that we use for each unit of insulin, how many points on the sugar does the level drop. So if the insulin sensitivity is 20, it means for every 20-point drop on the sugar, you need 1 unit of insulin. So for her, I had to change that from 10 to 25.
Wow. And what is the physiologic release of insulin by the pancreas in a normal, non-diabetic patient? Just so someone can kind of get it.
So Dr. Kitabchi from University of Tennessee in Memphis had done some very groundbreaking research. Dr. Kitabchi passed away last year, but his studies show that for a non-diabetic physiological condition, person releases around half a unit to 1 unit of insulin every hour. That is basal insulin without even any food. And then about 8 to 10 units of insulin with each meal. So that turns out to be around 48 to 50 units of insulin a day. But I think those studies are still in my humble opinion, are overestimating what normal insulin should be, because I've had patients, type 1 diabetic patients, who take 30 units of insulin a day total, and they're weighing somewhere around 160, 170 pounds, and they're less than what the physiological data shows, about around 40 to 50 units of insulin a day.
Yeah, because my type 1, the most recent one that I'm working with, she's using 22 to 24. Now she's little, she's like 100 pounds, but it's only, and her blood sugars are always under 200. So pretty incredible. Wow.
Yeah, so it's not, I wouldn't go by a set number. Every person has a different range, but we can fairly say that if there's a type 1 diabetic who is needing more than 50 units of insulin a day, then there is some degree of insulin resistance that they have developed on top of their type 1 diabetes, which is
Wow.
insulin deficiency.
So, can you, for those who maybe don't understand, so because I think endocrinology is fascinating, but it's also one of the most complex. I think, I remember subjects in medical school when you're studying it, because there's so many cascades and different things that you have to think about. What can you explain for patients, and they probably are not patients, but our listening audience, what insulin resistance is? Can you explain on a physiological, what does that mean exactly, or what's happening?
Sure. So insulin is released by the pancreas in response to food, and most of us understand that yes, insulin is released when we eat carbohydrates. But what many people don't know is that insulin is also released when you eat certain type of proteins. Many amino acids, which are the building block of proteins, elicit an insulin response from the pancreas. And the same with fats. So insulin is not just released when you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, but it can be released with even a very protein-rich meal. And the purpose of insulin is to open up the gates on the cell wall for the channels to let sugar enter the cells. So for glucose, which is the source of fuel for each cell, it has to enter the cell wall through these GLUT transporters, which are glucose transporters. And I would think of them as a little lock and key. So unless the key of insulin binds to the receptor on the surface of the cell, and a bunch of enzymatic processes happen inside the cell, the glucose transporter channels are not going to plug into the cell wall and let the sugar come into the cell. So in simple terms, insulin resistance is where the insulin is binding to the key is binding to the lock on the cell wall, but no process is happening inside the cell. In other words, the lock has the key, but it's not opening up. When it doesn't open up, the sugar does not enter the cell, so it stays in the bloodstream, and the sugar level starts going high.
Right.
And that's called insulin resistance. A huge portion of the sugar that we metabolize from the food enters into the muscles, the liver, and the fat tissue. And at all those three sites, insulin effect is essential. So if the insulin binds and it doesn't work the way it should work, then it doesn't show any effect. And the reason the insulin doesn't do its job is because of the buildup of micro particles of fat, which we call lipotoxicity, wherein those enzymatic processes which should be happening inside the cell once the insulin binds to the cell are not happening. So the process that is driving insulin resistance is chronic buildup of fat molecules beyond a certain capacity in each cell. That same process happens in the pancreas, which affects the ability of the pancreas to make insulin. That same process happens in the liver cell and the muscle cells, which impairs their ability to process the insulin. So insulin is there, but it is not doing what it's supposed to do.
So that's when you start seeing your type 1 diabetics who don't make insulin require more than what we described as a physiologic amount. So that's those saturated fats, because they're eating typically probably a standard American diet as well. And can you tell us where saturated fats can be primarily found?
So saturated fats are found heavily in animal foods. It's not that they are not found in plant-based foods too. There's coconut oil and avocados which do have saturated fats. But majority of places where you get the saturated fats are found in animal foods. So bacon, eggs, sausages, different types of meat, even a skinless, boneless piece of chicken has the same amount of cholesterol as a piece of similar weighing piece of steak. It's like 86, 89 milligrams. So it is kind of misinformation that, lean meats are actually lean. There is nothing lean there.
Right. So there's what comes with the animal protein is also the fat and the cholesterol.
Yes.
So I'm curious about when you mentioned the saturated fats in natural, coconut oil is not whole food, so we don't necessarily, I don't recommend oils, but in nuts and things that have, or avocado that have more fat, do you find that those actually cause blood sugars to rise as well in your diabetics?
So nuts and avocados are also having other nutrients. They have a lot of vitamins and minerals,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the unsaturated fatty acids, along with some saturated fatty acids. So what I recommend to patients is having a handful of nuts a day, preferably almonds and walnuts, because those are the most antioxidant dense type of nuts. All different nuts have different antioxidants, so I'm suggesting having a variety, but focus more on the almonds and walnuts. And when you have a handful a day, you're getting your essential fatty acids, you're getting your essential nutrients and vitamins and trace minerals. And at the same time, you're not creating a state where you're not having animal foods, but you're eating so much amount of nuts and avocado that you're still inciting an insulin resisting response. There have been people who do a plant-based keto modification with eating a lot of oils and nuts and avocados, and you can still see sugar spiking up if they eat a piece of fruit in spite of eating a plant-based diet. So instead of focusing on the percentage of macros of fat, protein, carbohydrate, what I tell people is to eat the actual different food groups and the macros will automatically be satisfied. But if you look at the numbers, then the magic number is 10%. So if you are eating near or under 10% of fats in your diet, then your insulin sensitivity is a lot better versus if that number goes to 20, 30, 40%.
Okay. Has
So it
there
doesn't
ever
have to be like 10 by the dot, but somewhere near 10%. Someone may need 15, someone may need 9, someone may need 8. So in that 8 to 15%, you're still good.
So, has there ever been any studies where they took someone who has been eating like a keto diet or a paleo diet that's, very low in carbs, 50 to 20 grams a day of carbs, basically starving their body, and eating a very high, animal protein, high fat diet, and then giving them a glucose challenge test to actually see that rise in blood sugar? Has that been done?
Um, so there are studies done which show that when people follow keto diet, they're getting flatter sugars and they're coming off medications, but they they are not doing the studies to show what happens to the insulin when you're doing that, because if that's shown, then that would kind of put a chink in the armor kind of thing. That what we are seeing with flat sugars is just half of the story. The insulin resistance is still happening, and it's happening even more.
Right. I mean, it's going to be low blood sugar because you're not eating sugar. Of course,
Yeah.
it's going to be low. This is like
and,
common.
and people who follow a keto-based regimen are strictly asked to avoid fruits, and if they have fruits, only berries, which are low glycemic, but not have other fruits. So it's very restricted regimen there, and so if they eat a fruit, they could see a rise in sugars. And on the opposite point, I've actually seen a lot of patients who, if they're eating whole food plant-based and a handful of nuts and some avocado, so it's not zero fat. It is actually, getting the healthy combination. They can eat a banana and a papaya and a mango and still not see sugar spiking. It's a common mindset that if you eat a fruit, your sugar is going to spike. So I tell patients fruit does not cause diabetes.
Right. So you say that again?
Fruits do not cause diabetes.
Thank you. If I have one more person tells me the diabetes, I can't have a banana. It's too much sugar.
But I do tell them that don't mix your fruit with cottage cheese.
Yeah.
Fruit by itself and preferably before a meal, because if it gets
Right.
absorbed by itself, it is best processed than if it's eaten at the end of the meal.
Okay. Very good. That's good.
Either as an afternoon snack or before dinner or for breakfast, but eat fruits by themselves. Maybe a handful of nuts with it are okay, but cottage cheese or dairy is mess up that glycemic response.
Absolutely. So when you have a patient, okay, or let's say there's an individual out here who's listening and they're going, wow, this is very powerful and I want to be, try this plant-based diet. They're either a type 1 or type 2 diabetic. They're using insulin or some type of medications that can lower blood sugar rapidly, glyburate, those type of things. What would your be advice to them? Should they start this by themselves, which I always encourage people to talk to their doctor, but if they're, let's say, how should they approach talking to their doctor, and what should they say, or what should they be looking for if they try to eat healthier diet like this, a whole food plant-based diet?
Yeah, so obviously it should be done under, medical supervision, because if they're on medications, there has to be titrated, adjusted down to prevent them, make sure that they don't get hypoglycemia, because it can happen very fast if they start making those changes in a matter of few days. In terms of how to bring it up with their physician, I would suggest, reading up data on Dr. Neil Barnard's study from 2006, where he compared ADA-based, low carb, high fat diet head to head with whole food plant-based diet without portion control, but no animal foods. And at 74 weeks, they were still able to maintain an A1C reduction of 1.5% without any portion control or calorie counting. And people lost weight on average. They felt better. Their A1C got better. There is studies done on, Dr. Anderson from 1921, where they reversed. People came off insulin within 16 days of being on whole food plant-based diet. So there are a few documentaries that I usually suggest to my patients, and I would suggest those here too. I don't have any conflict of interest with any of the producers or makers of the documentary, but there's a good way to get that perspective. And then when they approach it with their physician, they may have a better, understanding of what the plant-based nutrition is. So the common documentaries that I suggest, one is Forks Over Knives, What the Health, Plant Pure Nation, and Food Choices.
Absolutely. Another one is Eating You Alive is another good one.
Yeah, Eating You Alive is a good one. And the other thing to keep in mind is when they're trying to make a change, if they actually just add more vegetables and beans to their diet, and the beans, only exception is not to have baked beans because they're high in brown sugar. So the actual beans with vegetables, they will start seeing differences in their sugar numbers, and then work with their physician to see how they can add fruits and different whole grains in their diet. But definitely consult with their physician.
I really encourage my diabetics, obviously, to do beans. Can you explain like the second meal effect?
Sure. Yes.
What that means exactly?
For a few seconds, I need to put the charger on my laptop.
Okay. Not a problem. Yeah, so because the second meal effect is, I think, a really fascinating subject, because a lot of people go, oh, I can't eat beans. There's too many carbs in that. The devil is the carb, but there's no devil macronutrient. It's just we need to stop talking about food. People go, oh, I have a protein for dinner, and then I have my vegetables. I'm like, the original protein came from plants.
Yes.
But tell us what the second meal effect is.
Yeah, so there is no benefit in having secondhand recycled protein from animals.
Cut out the middle cow.
Source of the protein, which is the plant. Plants are the only species which can synthesize protein from the building blocks and the carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen. So get the high grade quality directly from the plants instead of getting it recycled. And the other thing I tell them is to not think of food as fat, carbohydrate, protein, but think of food as a combination of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, water, and look at food categories, not look at fat, carbohydrate, protein. So look at vegetables, look at beans and lentils or legumes, look at whole unrefined grains like quinoa, brown rice, buckwheat, millet, barley, oats, and look at nuts, look at fruits. So going back to the beans, beans have carbohydrates, but they are very high in fiber, and it's a lot of complex starch with the fiber and a lot of phytonutrients in the beans. Each bean has a different type of phytonutrient and different minerals and vitamins. They are loaded in B vitamins, they're loaded in potassium, they have a lot of magnesium. So when you eat a lentil-based meal, your sugars are actually going to be more flat and they tend to cause slower absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. And yes, there are a few exceptions. I still have had patients who, in spite of eating beans, may have a sugar elevation that was not that optimal. So yes, there is individualization, but fairly, for 95% of the people, beans still don't cause the sugar elevation that they have been blamed for, and they actually keep it pretty flat.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So there are
Cool.
two things. One is the fiber, and second is the phytonutrients, which actually prevents faster sugar absorption, more steady.
Right, absolutely. So it's the resistant starch, like in black beans, which has a huge amount. So, the fiber goes all the way, the starch goes all the way to the end of the colon. That's where it's so good for beans for
Yeah.
preventing colon cancer and things like that. Exactly. Do you have a favorite story of a patient that, just like when you're thinking about patients, your mind will kind of wander back to and go like, that was a really good, that
Yeah,
turned out
so
well.
kind of a drastic change story, I would say, is a couple years ago, a patient came to see me. She was a 55-year-old lady who had been dealing with diabetes for about 7, 8 years, and she had seen. So the first thing she tells me as soon as I walk into the room is, "I've seen 4 other endocrinologists, and all of them have told me to take insulin. I'm not taking insulin. So what else do you have to offer?" So it's kind of a disclaimer from her. And then so I sit down and I say, okay, her A1C was 11% at that time. So the other endocrinologists were not wrong in recommending insulin because there is glucotoxicity that happens and it starts killing your beta cells in the pancreas, which make insulin. So there is benefit to actually start insulin, get the sugars down while you're working with your plant-based diet to improve your insulin resistance. But somehow she had her mind fixated that she was not going to go the insulin route, which I don't blame her. Insulin is not a fun experience having to take a few times a day. So I showed her the data on plant-based nutrition and research done by Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Chips, the CHIP program by Dr. Hans Dill in California, and the cardiovascular data by Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn, and gave her the resources, the documentaries to watch, websites to look up recipes. And 3 months later, I see her back, and her A1C was 6.0. She had really gone with going whole food plant-based without any insulin. And she was on glimepiride and metformin, which was not changed. It was continued.
Yep. That's amazing. I had one that went from an A1C in 90 days, 11.8 to 6.2.
Yeah. And I've seen her over 2 years now, so she has maintained her A1C under
Amazing.
7%.
Oh, wow. That is so incredible. Those are the fun ones, right? That you hear patients, especially if you can get them young. This one was 28 in her late 20s. It's like her whole life ahead of her. So just to get more personal, do you have a family yourself?
I am married. My wife, and she also happens to be my office manager.
Perfect. Does she eat plant-based with you?
Yes, we are plant-based. So I started initially, and then my parents live with me. So
Oh, okay.
my mom adapted plant-based nutrition too, and my dad and my wife, they came on board, and so all four of us are whole food plant-based, and we are working towards going no oil. So
Nice.
it's an interesting journey. For the most part, we have eliminated oil from our cooking, but there are still some dishes that we still use oil, and we're working on techniques where we can reduce that or make it just a drop of
Mm-hmm.
oil. Because although oils are derived from plants, they are highly processed, and the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is quite skewed to like 20 to 1 or 25 to 1
Wow.
in many of the oils, and the ideal ratio we need is 1 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm.
even with oils, you have to be very judicious in using them. Less is better.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, and they're just so rapidly absorbed, right? So there's no slowing down. It's just the oil.
Yeah.
As far as so you're eating, I'm assuming traditional Indian fare at
Yes.
home, and do
So
you
we,
have? Go ahead.
no, finish your question.
I was going to ask if you had a recipe or a favorite food, because I know like lentil dal is some of my most favorite food. And
Yeah.
so, like, what do you what is your favorite dish that you found that's like, wow, this went really well?
So we actually, yes, I eat mainly, Indian cuisine-based diet, but we once a week we also have pasta. Once a week we also have Mexican food. Uh, you know, um, Continental food. We have Chinese
Hmm.
stir fries. So again, we are all making this at home. I can count on my fingertips how many times I eat out in a year.
Oh
Um,
wow.
So, and it's, the more you do, your taste buds and palates change so that you can actually not handle most of the Western food because it's lathered with sugar, salt and oil.
Mm-hmm.
So you stop going to places, but yes, you can still, you don't have to, you can, you're not in a situation where you cannot eat out. You can still eat out, just make better choices and modifications.
Right.
That is still possible, but we eat a lot of lentils and dals. Uh,
Mm.
that's pretty much on a daily basis. There are a lot of Indian vegetables that we cook with a lot of spices and curry. Um, there's a vegetable called bitter gourd, uh,
Mm.
which is very good for diabetes too. There are a lot of extracts and capsules out there from bitter gourd that you can get, but I prefer getting it from the whole fruit. So we make vegetables from that, and then lentils are part of daily diet. There is some form of lentil that we eat every day. At
Right.
least two servings of fruit, a handful of nuts. Um, and the part of India that I come from, I've grown up eating vegetarian. So
Mm.
eating vegetarian was kind of a little natural to me. Um, but what has changed is the use of dairy because there is significant usage of dairy in the foods that we traditionally made. So we have worked on finding alternatives on dairy in all those foods,
Hmm.
and that has made it really interesting. Like there's a dish we call it fruit salad. So there are a bunch of fruits in it, but it's actually more like custard. There is milk and cream, and it's a kind of a custard consistency.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dessert, but it used to be my favorite dessert growing up. And when I quit dairy for quite a while, I couldn't have that, and I was missing out on that. And we recently found a way to make it from almond milk,
Oh.
and just blend up some banana, and there's a fruit called chiku. We call it chiku in India, but it's also found in Mexico. It's a brown tropical fruit. I think it's called zapato.
Oh, Zapato. Okay.
Zapato.
Yeah.
So we call it chiku in India.
Okay.
There's a
A little bit
black,
more starchy type thing.
yeah, it's a starchy fruit. So you can blend that up and get that same custody consistency with other not vegetables, but fruits in it. So as that's what I said, it's been an interesting journey trying to make changes in the traditional recipes and, make them more whole food plant based, and it's
Right.
fun.
And I think if I look back over, because I've been eating plant based for almost 7 years now, and when I look back over my own evolution of changing the diet, so we came home to my husband, and I had 3 teenagers at the time at home. They're all in their 20s now and out of the house. Well, they're home for Christmas now, but when it was really interesting, the first year, I think we spent a lot of time eating a lot of, the substitute meats and stuff, because I was still in my mind thinking, I have to replace
The
this type.
protein.
Yeah, like I was not as like, I have to replace this consistency and the taste the same. But then it started growing, right? So then I started looking at food as flavors, like, where can I start pulling in different flavors? And I don't have to replace meat with a meat substitute. I can do different things. It's okay that it's not exactly the same. So, one of I grew up in New Mexico, so I love Mexican food. So we had a lot of chilies and burritos and enchiladas and all that good stuff. So I recently came up with, using walnuts and lentils and roasted tomatoes, and I used cumin and chili powder and hatch green chilies from New Mexico, the chilies from New Mexico, and created like kind of a ground beef consistency. But then I would roll those in corn tortillas and use an air fryer. Oh, these are things that I didn't get to have for a long time, called taquitos. Oh my goodness, they're so good. I was like, yes. And so I started sharing those with my husband's omnivore family. And they're like, this isn't meat, this is delicious. And they're like, can you bring more of these for Christmas? I'm like, you bet. So that's what's fun, is you start playing with flavors and textures, and you start growing as a cook. You start enjoying being in the kitchen, because it's like, ooh, what am I going to make today that's yummy?
Yeah, it is quite gratifying. It's like there is in the Gujarati cuisine, the part of India that I'm from, it's called Gujarat, and each state has a different cuisine. So it's a lentil soup made from chickpea flour, but we call it kadhi.
Okay.
And it is basically buttermilk mixed with chickpea flour and then tempered with spices and ghee, which is clarified butter.
Oh, wow.
So it's very tasty.
I'm sure.
We have it with rice. So that's something that I used to have before, but I was not having it for a while. So we found almond yogurt that you can buy. There's a brand called Kite Hill that we usually buy,
Okay.
and plain almond, not yogurt, not the flavored one. And we can make the curry from that, just like we were making it from yogurt before. We even make our own yogurt at home now. We use peanuts, we use almonds, cashews, brown rice. So there are many different recipes out there. So
Absolutely. We experimented making our own yogurt too, because it was really fun. One of my kids, he's 20 now, but my youngest at the time, he was, I don't know, 15 or 16. They're all plant-based. They're 24, 22, and 20 now. And he was always my willingness to experiment with me in the kitchen. And so
you
we
need
had,
one member to be willing to try things.
and what's fun is that he grew up, this was while we were in Colorado, and I'm in Washington State now, but we lived in this little western town in Colorado, and he relished being the kid that was, vegan or plant-based. He's like, it's kind of cool being the different kid. And I was like, that is the right attitude to have. And so if you can instill that in your children, that it's fun to experiment, it's fun to be the different one and share these things with people, they're so delighted and excited, and it's new, and it's like, wow, that's so fun, and it's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's exactly. And then what I've also found from patients is and my personal experience too, is when you change your diet within a few weeks of eating whole food plant-based, your palate and taste buds change so much, your sense of smell gets so much sharper, that things that you were relishing before really don't seem that appetizing anymore. I've
Mm-hmm.
had patients who don't eat any meat for 30 days, and they have this steak dinner that they had planned. After doing this for 30 days, they had planned, okay, I'm going to have this steak dinner. And it ends up being that they really didn't enjoy it as much, or they felt like it was like a rock in their stomach that just didn't move after eating it for a lot of hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I try to bring up with patients is, your body starts telling you what's good for you. You just have
Right.
to be attentive to what the body is telling you.
I mean, I have 7 persimmons sitting on my counter. I'm waiting for them to ripen. And it's just like, all of us are like eyeing it like, I'm going to get one of those. Y'all aren't eating all of them because, there's a short window that they're ripe and then it's like they're not ripe or too ripe.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
we're all watching them and squeezing them as we walk by. Like, our counters are covered full of fruits and vegetables and all sorts of, so it's easy for people to grab and munch and different things. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to discover that you have taste and flavors that were never dreamt of. It was either, like you said, you had a lot of dairy and a lot of, you have a lot of spices in Indian food, and I had Mexican spices growing up and stuff, but the rest of it was just kind of like potatoes, and we'd have vegetables, but they were fried, but it's always the similar salty flavors. But now it's like, wow, there's all sorts of fun cuisines
Yeah.
that I never even thought of having. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's when it becomes more, fun and a more group activity. It's not like you
Mm.
just doing it by yourself, but your whole family is centered around it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have friends, family visiting, and they get to experience that, they get to learn something new. And I've had quite a few friends and family who, if they stay with us for a couple of days or a week or whatever, most of them end up quitting dairy.
That's awesome.
So
I found that dairy, I can get most people off of dairy just by having a logical discussion with them. Like milk is made to grow a cow to 1,000 pounds in a year. What do you think that does to a human body? And, just kind of walking them through that process. And it's really interesting because they're like, I never thought of it that way. And I was like, well, if you have no problem drinking milk, go drink a glass of human breast milk. They're like, I'm like, you're a
that's
human.
gross.
And they
Yeah,
just look at me like I said something that was like, what are you, growing horns out of my head or something? I said, go drink a glass of human milk, you human. They're like, no. I'm like, okay, then go drink a glass of breast milk from a cow. This makes no sense. What is wrong with you? They're like, ah.
my
I
grandpa
love
used
doing
to
that.
remind me every time we are the only species which drinks milk of other species. No other species drinks other species' milk.
Exactly. It just blows my, I mean, why I never, I mean, I was 41 when I switched over the diet. I was like, why didn't I think of, like, what
Yeah,
was the
we
block?
all share that kind of a, no, it's not regret, but kind of a analytical moment that why didn't this happen earlier?
It's like, why does it take so long to open up the cheese? I'm like, I don't understand. Some people intuitively get that. Like, my daughter hated milk. Like, she just like, this is gross. Why would I drink milk like this? And they're like, that made complete sense to her. But I'm like, well, why didn't it make sense to me? Here's a kid telling me this. It should make, I'm like, well, I should question.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring it up because my wife hated milk. So when I would push her or suggest, okay, have your milk, get your calcium and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
my previous incorrect nutritional view, she would not like that. So as soon as I stopped bugging her about the milk, she's like, I'm feeling so much
I know.
happier.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, it really is interesting just looking over the evolution, and I think, after I've been doing this for 10 or 15 or 20 years, it'll be really interesting to see the changes. And because we've become more and more and more like, like there's no oil now in our foods, and I'm very seldom will add salt. And because when you go somewhere now and it's like super salty, you're like,
You can't handle
wow. I have to send it. I've had more than once where they had to take back a food. I was like, I'm sorry, I can't eat this. It's way too much salt. And they're like,
it.
really? I was like, oh yeah. So I'm like, if you use it, it should be just a little pinch, but nothing like, oh my goodness. But yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr.
There's,
Patel, go
there's
ahead.
actually a group of people that are working on creating a charter school here in Clearwater.
Okay.
St. Pete, Clearwater, just 40 minutes from Tampa. And they are working on creating a charter school, public charter school, which is going to be completely plant-based.
Awesome.
So
Wow.
I've been invited there to speak there at their fundraiser next month.
Oh, wow. That is
It is
awesome.
what I was trying to suggest is things are changing.
Absolutely, things are changing. And what's the name of, is there a link or something that you can send to me that I
I
can
don't
include?
know. I can send it to you, but it's called
Awesome.
King's Charter.
It's what again?
King's Charter.
King's Charter. Okay. That's fascinating. Yeah, I would love to include, so if people wanted to come, if they're in that area, to come and watch you speak, that'd be great. Awesome. Well, I know I've taken you for over an hour. I so apologize. But I love talking about this stuff, and especially to other physicians. And I'm just so thankful for you, as an endocrinologist, taking that lead, because I think you're part of a very, generation that's going to hopefully lead others into that area and pull them into plant. So like my daughter's in medical school. She's a second year right now. So I'm like, yes, I birthed one child that's a doctor going to move into that direction. So, I was like, we need more and more people like you who are leading the way in your specialty that's been resistant. So I applaud you for your efforts.
Thank you, and gratitude, and thank you to all your viewers and listeners, and thank you to do this. Maintaining a podcast and doing this is not an easy job. So it takes a lot of commitment and work and time to first do this and then keep doing it. And you have connected me to so many other people. So there's an important role that you have played.
Thank you so much. I think I've become a connector. I do like connecting people, and I've been doing this for over 2 years now, and I get no money from it. It is a beautiful way to meet amazing people such as yourself.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.